Good evening, everyone. Who here ate meat today? And yes, that includes chicken and fish. You probably had it with eggs for breakfast, or in a taco this afternoon, or most likely both. Meat is home. It's part of who we are, or so we say. It's deeply embedded into our concept of culture. Carnitas, pozole, menudo. That's what has become synonymous with being Mexican. A meal doesn't feel like a meal unless there's a slab of meat in the middle. But was it always this way? I remember when I first became a vegetarian after my third semester at Harvard. I came to Laredo, went to a restaurant, and could not find anything to eat. So naturally, I called the waitress over, was like, hey, is there any way that you can take off the meat on this, or is there a way that we can make it vegetarian? And she was like, oh, you're vegetarian? Perfect, we have chicken and fish here too, don't worry about it. And I just stared at her. But I mean, the word vegan isn't even in our lexicon. Who ever heard of a vegan Mexican from Texas? I'm a walking contradiction. We're Tejanos, not vegetarianos, right? But was it always this way? Did being Mexican imply having to eat meat for every single meal? I would argue not. Did being Mexican really mean having to eat like this? I think we should go back to our ancestors. What did they eat? What did the original Mexicans eat? What did the Aztecs, the Mayans? They were known as a people of the corn for a reason. Their staple foods were, aside from corn, beans, squash, along with the innumerable fruits and vegetables that are essentially indigenous to Mexico. I remember when I went to Mexico City this past month, I felt like I was in heaven as a vegan. Even though you guys probably think, wait a minute, he was in the heart of Mexican cuisine, it must have been a living hell not being able to eat any type of meat, or cheese for that matter. But when I went to the mercados there and saw all the fruits and vegetables that I never even knew existed, things like zapote, mamey, chirimoya, guanábana, and the list goes on. So as I realized that I had no idea what these things were, I felt like I was doing my culture a disservice by not knowing this and by just slapping on more meat. But we're not alone. It's not just our culture doing this, it's a worldwide phenomenon. As a world, we consume double the amount of meat that we did 50 years ago, as you can see in that graph. In the last 100 years, the US consumes 5 times the amount of meat that we did in 1910. Meaning that if you were to eat meat only on the weekends, you would still be eating more meat on a per week basis than someone who lived 100 years ago. And just to put that into context, the average American consumes more than 270 pounds of meat a year. So for anyone that weighs around 130 pounds, you're essentially eating double your body weight in meat. I think that's crazy. All right, so we eat more meat. So what? Isn't meat good for you, you ask? And more importantly, if I give up meat, where on earth am I going to get my protein? Precisely from there, the earth. Meat, by no doubt, has nutritional value. but I would argue that it comes with more drawbacks than benefits. As more and more studies are being conducted, just like the Harvard School of Public Health seminal study in 2012, that essentially, one of the largest studies to date, essentially established a very real association that a lot of studies have found as well, where increased meat consumption is highly correlated with increased morbidity. Meaning that those in the study who ate more meat also had increased mortality in terms of cardiovascular mortality and cancer mortality. And on the flip side, vegetarians, or those who indulge in a more plant-based diet, ended up being healthier, thinner, and consumed more vitamins on average. And believe it or not, vegetarians do tend to consume more than the daily requirement of protein. I know this is crazy, but bear with me. And if you don't believe me, look at all of those who come before you and have made the switch. Like Bill Clinton, for example, who became a vegan after 2 heart procedures because he didn't want to continue playing with death. Or Natalie Portman, Miss Black Swan over there, who actually lived in my dorm when she was at Harvard. Or any of these great people. Recognize any of them? But where does that leave us? Why now and why us? Unfortunately, we are experiencing an impending health crisis, where some scholars contend that we may have a generation that lives less than its parents, in large part due to diabetes, obesity, and a host of other diet-related illnesses. And what's worse for us is that we're straddled between the 2 least hospitable places for promoting healthy eating habits. On the one side, we have the US, where cardiovascular disease and stroke claim the most lives, and where the Center for Disease Control actually estimates that over a quarter of those deaths are preventable. And then we have Mexico, where this past year, it claimed the top spot as the most obese country on earth. Of course, the US was second place. But where does that leave us? The Mexican Americans, the ones who are in the middle. As you probably guessed it, not in a very good place. We're more likely to be obese. We're more likely to have diabetes and die from it, compared to non-Hispanic whites. And what's worse is that the problem is growing. The UT Health Science Center here in San Antonio, well, over there in San Antonio, actually projects that obesity will increase by more than 500% in the next 30 years among Texas Hispanics. Think about that for a second. 500%. And if the adverse consequences to our health and our community here at home weren't enough, our dietary patterns are also eating away at our larger home, the earth. With the increased meat consumption, to reciprocate, there's been an increased production of livestock, where factory farming, grazing animal feed have continued to grow to the extent that thousands of acres in Brazil's rainforest and across the world have been cut down to make room for this, to the point where livestock production has become one of the largest threats to the world's biodiversity. The UN states that the livestock production process contributes and emits more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. That means that this process right here contributes more to climate change than all the cars, all the ships, all the planes, all the buses, all the motorcycles in the world. But fortunately, there's hope. Thanks to those who are sitting here in the audience. Because we, as the millennials, the young people, Generation Y, or whatever you want to call it, we acknowledge that we have a responsibility not only to our local home, but to our global one as well. Where more than two-thirds of us save and recycle, and where the majority of us stand behind the 97% of scientists who agree that climate change is real. And we believe that we as humans have a role to play in that. So when your fork can be a more powerful tool at combating climate change than your car keys, the question then becomes, why not? But above all, it would be a compassionate choice, and one that's in line with our values as a community. We as Latinos are warm people. We kiss when we say hi. We hug, and we love intensely. Even the smallest members of our families, our pets. But we would never conceive of our dog at home or our horse at the ranch to be condemned to life without sunlight, confined in a place where they can't move, and injected with hormones and antibiotics, only to be sent and slaughtered with more than 1 million animals slaughtered for food per hour in the US alone. 1 million animals are slaughtered every hour to meet our consumption here in the US. What's more problematic is that the more that we study these animals, the more that we realize how intelligent and complex these creatures are. For example, cows here have biffles. They have their best friends, and they display signs of stress when they're not together. Whether it's to hear music or just to be together, they have stress when they're not with each other. Or pigs, on the other hand, who have been compared to have the intelligence of our dogs, a man's best friend. And in studies done by Cambridge University, actually performed better at some cognitive tests than 3-year-old children. So if you're ready to make a commitment, here's how you can do it. And especially for all those, please keep in mind that it's still January, so you can still add on another resolution. Especially for all those who stopped going to the gym after the first week. You can start off by just eating less meat. For example, in your next carne asada, instead of having the entire grill covered in beef and sausage with the token onion in the corner, try and take off some of that meat and put some vegetable skewers in there. Some grilled poblano peppers or some mushrooms. Or you can just, if you need more discipline like me, try and cut out a type of meat. The one that you eat the most. Like chicken, or pork, or beef. And sub that with vegetables. Don't just eat another type of meat to compensate for that. Or you can even just, if you don't want to do that, take out meat one day out of the week. Join the Meatless Monday movement that's sweeping California. And you can even work your way up to the weekday vegetarianism that Graham Hill talks about in his TED Talk, where you make meat a thing of the weekends. If you're feeling really bold, you can try being vegan and follow Beyonce's 22 vegan challenge, 22-day vegan challenge. And though I can't guarantee that you'll look like her afterwards, I can guarantee that you'll be glad you did it. And if you need some support, check out Oprah's Vegan Starter Kit, because she's also a fan of plant-based diets. And if Oprah tells you to do something, well, you better do it. Because, well, it's Oprah. And now it's now easier than ever, and I know that there are people with limited resources, but if you have the resources and you have the time, it's now easier than ever to go a more plant-based diet, where there are companies all over the place that are starting up, like Hampton Creek Foods, that makes plant-based eggs and cookies and mayonnaise, or Beyond Meat, that makes vegan chicken strips. Or even some restaurants here in Laredo, actually I only know of one, that makes soy-based pozole and milanesas. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So long as you do something. The decision to make a more compassionate, healthier, and more sustainable diet is in our hands. Thank you.